As the sun set on the British Empire in the mid-20th century, a secret operation unfolded across dozens of former colonies that would remain hidden for over half a century. Operation Legacy represented one of the most extensive efforts by any government to systematically rewrite its imperial history through the deliberate destruction, concealment, or falsification of official documents. This coordinated campaign to control the historical narrative continues to reverberate through international relations, historical scholarship, and legal proceedings today. The operation was born from a simple but profound fear that the true record of British colonial rule would prove so damaging that it could undermine Britain's standing in the world and expose officials to criminal prosecution. As independence movements gained momentum across the empire, colonial administrators received explicit instructions to ensure that only documents presenting British rule in a favourable light would remain accessible to successor governments or future historians. The existence of Operation Legacy remained one of Britain's most closely guarded secrets until 2011, when a remarkable discovery changed everything. Human rights lawyers representing elderly Kenyan survivors of colonial detention camps had spent years pursuing compensation claims, only to be told repeatedly by the British government that all relevant documents had been destroyed or lost during the transfer of power. The official position was clear. No records existed that could substantiate claims of systematic torture and abuse. The lawyers' persistence, however, led them to an extraordinary find. At a secretive government facility in Hanslope Park, Buckinghamshire, they uncovered a cache of approximately 8,800 colonial files that had been deliberately concealed for decades. These documents had been marked watch files, indicating their sensitive nature and the need for permanent secrecy. The discovery immediately raised troubling questions. If these documents existed, what else had been hidden, and what had actually been destroyed as claimed? The revelation prompted an urgent government review that led to the declassification of thousands of additional documents, but it also confirmed the worst suspicions about the scope of concealment. Foreign Office records revealed that Operation Legacy had affected virtually every British colonial territory as it approached independence, spanning continents and cultures, from the Caribbean islands to the Arabian Peninsula, from African colonies to Southeast Asian territories. Operation Legacy operated according to specific guidelines issued by the Secretary of State for the Colonies, creating a systematic framework for managing the historical record. Colonial officials received detailed instructions on categorizing documents into those that could safely be left for successor governments and those that required removal or destruction. The criteria were explicit and damning. Remove any documents that could embarrass Her Majesty's government, expose local collaborators, or reveal intelligence sources and methods. The operation involved multiple carefully orchestrated phases. First, officials conducted comprehensive reviews of existing files, identifying sensitive material according to the established criteria. Documents deemed problematic faced one of two fates: immediate destruction on site through burning or shredding, or transport to the United Kingdom for indefinite storage in secure facilities. To prevent obvious gaps from appearing in official archives, administrators were instructed to remove entire files rather than individual documents, and to avoid leaving any evidence of their destruction or removal. The scale of this concealment was breathtaking. In some territories, truckloads of documents were burned in massive bonfires, while in others, weighted crates were dumped into the ocean. Officials received instructions to work quickly and discreetly, often conducting their activities under cover of darkness. The operation required coordination between multiple government departments, from colonial administrations to intelligence services, all working toward the common goal of controlling what future generations would know about British imperial rule. The Kenyan documents proved among the most damaging discoveries, revealing systematic torture, sexual abuse and murder in detention camps during the Mau Mau emergency between 1952 and 1960. These meticulously kept records showed how colonial administrators had deliberately worked to conceal these abuses from Parliament and the British public, maintaining detailed correspondence about the need for political deniability regarding torture practices. The hidden documents revealed that up to 1.5 million Kikuyu civilians had been detained without trial in a network of camps where abuse was not just tolerated but systematically implemented. Camp commanders maintained detailed logs of their activities while simultaneously receiving advice to burn documents that could embarrass Her Majesty's government. The records included horrific accounts of castration, sexual abuse, and beatings, alongside bureaucratic discussions about maintaining public relations advantage. Perhaps most chilling were the documents showing how officials developed elaborate justifications for their actions, creating a parallel narrative that portrayed detention camps as rehabilitation centers, while knowing full well the reality of what occurred within them. The evidence proved so compelling that the British government eventually agreed to pay compensation to surviving victims and officially acknowledged that torture had occurred, marking a rare admission of colonial-era crimes. The Cyprus revelations exposed the sophisticated and morally complex nature of British counterinsurgency operations against EOKA, Ethnic Organosis, Keprion Agoniston, or National Organization of Cypriot Fighters. Founded in 1955 under Colonel George Grivas, EOKA conducted an extensive guerrilla campaign seeking enosis, the political union of Cyprus with Greece. The organization employed classic guerrilla tactics through small, secretive cells, including bombings of government installations, assassinations of British officials and collaborators, and systematic sabotage of infrastructure. The concealed documents revealed how British authorities responded with equally sophisticated counter-insurgency operations that went far beyond conventional military tactics. The hidden records showed extensive surveillance networks monitoring thousands of civilians, including school teachers and clergy, suspected of EOKA sympathies. Most controversially, the documents exposed detailed British knowledge of and sometimes tacit support for Turkish Cypriot paramilitary groups, particularly Turkish Resistance Organization, which opposed enosis and frequently cooperated with British security forces against EOKA. The most damaging revelation was evidence that British authorities deliberately fostered intercommunal tensions between Greek and Turkish Cypriots as a divide-and-rule strategy. Hidden documents contained explicit instructions for psychological operations designed to turn the two communities against each other, ultimately contributing to the island's tragic partition. The records showed how Britain manipulated ethnic tensions not just to defeat EOKA, but to ensure that an independent Cyprus would remain divided and therefore dependent on British influence. In Malaya and Singapore, Operation Legacy focused on concealing the true extent of British actions during the Malayan Emergency, 1948 to 1960, and subsequent security operations. The hidden documents revealed massive human rights violations that had been systematically covered up, including the forced relocation of over 500,000 Chinese civilians into new villages surrounded by barbed wire and armed guards. The concealed record showed extensive use of torture during interrogations, detailed food denial operations designed to starve communist guerrillas, and widespread collective punishment policies, including the burning of suspected communist villages. Perhaps most shocking were documents revealing the indiscriminate use of aerial bombardment with napalm and other incendiary weapons against rural areas suspected of harboring insurgents, tactics that would later become infamous in Vietnam. British authorities had also developed sophisticated psychological warfare operations, disseminating false intelligence to provoke conflicts within communist ranks, while maintaining extensive surveillance networks that monitored not just suspected communists but legitimate political opposition movements. The hidden records detailed how intelligence services compiled dossiers on thousands of civilians, including trade unionists, teachers, and journalists deemed potentially subversive. In Singapore specifically, Operation Legacy concealed evidence of brutal suppression of student protesters and labour movements during the path to independence. The documents exposed controversial intelligence-sharing agreements with Lee Kuan Yew's People's Action Party, revealing how British authorities helped eliminate socialist and communist political rivals through coordinated security operations and systematic infiltration of opposition movements. Across the Caribbean territories, Operation Legacy systematically concealed documents concerning labor disputes, independence negotiations, and internal security operations. The hidden files revealed extensive surveillance of independence leaders and detailed British efforts to maintain economic and political influence after formal independence. In Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, and Guyana, documents showed how British authorities monitored and sometimes disrupted labor movements while maintaining detailed intelligence files on political leaders they deemed unreliable. In former African colonies, the concealed documents shed new light on the true extent of British surveillance and manipulation of independence movements. The files contained extensive dossiers on prominent leaders like Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana and Julius Nyerere in Tanzania, revealing sophisticated intelligence operations designed to monitor and influence their activities. The documents showed how British authorities attempted to maintain control through local proxies and economic pressure even after formal independence, contradicting public narratives about smooth transitions to self-governance. In the Middle East, Operation Legacy concealed extensive documentation of British intelligence operations, relationships with local rulers, and the management of oil resources. The hidden documents revealed the sophisticated nature of British influence operations in territories like Aden, now Yemen, Bahrain, and other Gulf states, showing how colonial administrators worked to ensure continued British access to strategic resources and military bases. The concealed files expose detailed records of British involvement in regional politics, including support for favoured rulers and systematic efforts to undermine nationalist movements. These documents revealed how Britain attempted to maintain informal empire through economic agreements and security arrangements that preserved British interests while creating the appearance of independence. The revelations from Operation Legacy have fundamentally transformed the understanding of British colonial rule and forced a comprehensive reassessment of the decolonisation process. Academic histories have been revised, legal cases reopened, and diplomatic relationships strained as the true extent of concealment became apparent. The operation's discovery has provided powerful evidence for critics of British imperial legacy, while severely complicating official efforts to present a balanced view of empire. For affected countries, the revelations have validated long-standing claims about colonial abuses that had been dismissed for decades as exaggeration or propaganda. In Kenya, Cyprus, and elsewhere, elderly survivors finally received official acknowledgement of their suffering, leading to compensation payments and public apologies that seemed impossible just years before. However, these victories came at enormous personal cost, as many victims had died waiting for recognition that arrived decades too late. The discovery has also raised profound questions about historical accountability and the manipulation of collective memory. If such extensive concealment occurred across dozens of territories, what other documents remain classified or were successfully destroyed? This uncertainty continues to influence historical research and international relations as countries grapple with incomplete or deliberately falsified colonial records that may never be fully reconstructed. Operation Legacy serves as a powerful reminder of how governments can systematically manipulate historical records to serve political interests. The operation demonstrates that official archives, long considered the gold standard for historical research, can be deliberately corrupted through systematic concealment and destruction. This revelation has forced historians to fundamentally reassess their methodology, placing greater emphasis on oral histories, alternative archives, and comparative research across different territories. The economic and diplomatic ramifications continue to unfold decades after the initial discovery. Beyond direct compensation payments to torture survivors, the revelations have influenced broader debates about reparations for colonial exploitation. The documented evidence of systematic abuse and concealment has strengthened legal and moral arguments for addressing historical injustices, even as it has complicated Britain's relationships with Commonwealth countries and former colonies. The operation's exposure has also influenced contemporary discussions about government transparency and accountability. In an era of increased scrutiny over state surveillance and secrecy, Operation Legacy provides a historical precedent for how governments can abuse classification systems to hide embarrassing or criminal activities. The systematic nature of the concealment raises ongoing questions about what modern governments might be hiding from public scrutiny. Operation Legacy represents perhaps the most extensive government effort to control the historical narrative in the modern era. Its exposure has revealed not merely the extent of colonial abuses, but the sophisticated and systematic methods employed to conceal them from public knowledge. The operation's legacy forces continued confrontation with uncomfortable historical truths, while raising enduring questions about governmental transparency, historical accountability, and the responsibility of nations to acknowledge their past actions honestly. The full scope of Operation Legacy may never be completely known, as successful concealment by definition leaves no traces. What is certain is that this systematic campaign has forever changed how we understand both the end of the British Empire and the critical importance of preserving accurate historical records. For the affected nations and their peoples, the revelations have brought both vindication and the sobering knowledge that significant aspects of their colonial experience were deliberately erased from official history. The operation's ultimate exposure suggests that while governments may succeed in concealing uncomfortable truths for extended periods, the historical record has a way of eventually asserting itself, often when least expected and most needed. Thanks for watching. If you learned something from this video, please like, share and comment below. Don't forget to subscribe if you are new here.